Good morning, everyone. I'm Rod Kemkus, a member of the Board of Trustees. Just a few announcements. They're on the back of the order of service today. Just want to encourage everyone to attend the Bainbridge Pride event next, is that Sunday or coming up in July 15th. The other one that I wanted to highlight is, which is not on here, is on August 20th, we're planning to do an all Cedars picnic at Battle Point Park. So you'll have some more details coming out on that. And so other than that, welcome.
I was mentioning to some of you this morning how good it feels to be back after a week in Pittsburgh. And to be honest, Pittsburgh is actually a really, really cool city. There was some great museums. Got to catch up with some wonderful folks. I am not a fan of humidity at all. And so it's nice to be back here, even though we have some moisture in the air. It's less oppressive when you step outside. So, I want to open our service with these words from the Reverend Dr. Hope Johnson. And these words were shared with the Unitarian Universalist General Assembly in 2013. At the time, we were navigating some turbulent things as an association, and I thought as I was reflecting that these words still ring true as we reflect today on the things we are navigating as an association and congregation today. So I invite you to take a breath. Center yourselves in this moment as I share these words. We are one, a diverse group of proudly kindred spirits, here not by coincidence, but because we chose to journey together. We are active and proactive. We care deeply. We live our love as best we can. We are one, working, eating, laughing, playing, singing, storytelling, sharing and rejoicing, getting to know each other, taking risks, opening up, questioning, seeking, searching, trying to understand, struggling, making mistakes, paying attention, asking questions, listening, living out our answers, learning to love our neighbors, learning to love ourselves, apologizing and forgiving with humility, and being forgiven through grace, creating the beloved community together. We are one. Come, let us worship together.
Thank you, Julia. I have dozens of memories from past General Assemblies. I'll share 3 of them, and I'll be brief. There's so much to unpack and process as you travel home from GA. The conversations you have with friends you haven't seen in years, the workshops you chose to attend, second-guessing yourself for missing the one event that turned out to be super energizing for the people who attended and told you about it the next day. This has never happened to me. There are endless choices for valuable content. It's an embarrassment of riches. The cool thing about GA is that you're together in a large venue with tons of people who all have the same foundation of UU values and history. When I'm at GA, I feel safe, I feel heard, and I feel seen. I know I'm not alone. That's the value of these large gatherings. You come home buoyed and filled with fuel to propel you into the next church year. In 2009, our family traveled to Salt Lake City to the GA that launched the Standing on the Side of Love campaign, now rebranded to Side with Love to be more inclusive. We bought 5 yellow t-shirts and wore them off and on throughout the week. Our eldest daughter, Marina, was a delegate that year, and with the help of our ministers, Barbara and Jocko, she took the role very seriously. I remember her walking around to all the presidential candidate booths, taking notes, carefully evaluating each potential president, as well as the various issues being voted on that year. Not sure how many endless plenary sessions she attended, but I'm sure she sat through a few. As a high school junior, Marina didn't have any preconceived judgments about who should win, and she did her due diligence. This was the year that Peter Morales became the UUA president. There's a lot more to share about this particular trip, about how the 5 of us drove to Salt Lake City in our white Dodge van, stopped to camp for a few days in Yellowstone, but those are stories for another time. My favorite General Assembly was Portland 2015. This is a year that Jeff and I chaperoned our youth to General Assembly. This is one of the years. We've done it more than once, but in 2015, we chaperoned our youth to General Assembly, and it was generously sponsored by our congregation. Lydia and her roommate from Bellingham also attended, and they worked the event. This is a bridging year for Archer. He had already completed his Youth Con bridging and his Cedars bridging, so this is his 3rd bridging and the only one of our 3 children to bridge at General Assembly. And I'll mention that all 3 of our children have made lifelong friends because of their UU connections at these large gatherings. This was the GA that began with a focus on the recent shootings in a Charleston church and the collective grieving to be done. Then, so this is what's going on all week, then, Saturday, June 26th, the Supreme Court, it was announced on TV that the Supreme Court legalized same-sex marriage. This is definitely one of those I remember where I was moments. I was having breakfast at the hotel with Lydia, getting ready to catch the MAX light rail to the convention center. The news broke on CNN. We weren't really paying attention, but then everybody kind of looked up to the TV. There were videos of people starting to gather and celebrate. I remember kind of looking at Lydia and both of us having this sense of shock and combined relief, excitement, joy, still seemed kind of surreal, thinking this is really happening and wanting to hurry up and get to GA to celebrate with our extended UU family. Here's my Facebook post from that day. I do declare there's no better place to be than General Assembly on a day like today. In between morning worship and the general meeting, President Peter Morales draped a rainbow over the main podium and invited all the couples to stage who can now legally marry. There were at least 50 to 80 couples on the platform, and we sang, cried together. President Morales gave us a pardon for the tiny amount of self-congratulation for the hard work our denomination has done in this arena. Then a handful of speakers took their turn And every speaker noted in some way the bittersweet joy of celebrating while Charleston is still crippled with grief. And we pledged to not rest on our laurels, but continue to fight for social, racial, economic, immigrant, reproductive, and many other justices. Then after our 3-hour business meeting, we had a pop-up worship service led by pastors mostly my age or older who spoke of the 80s, and we remembered those that we had lost to AIDS by leaping in the air and shouting out their names. I jumped up and I shouted my high school best friend's name, Dominic, who died in 2005. I was a member of the pop-up choir for this service, and we sang We Are a Gentle, Angry People, written by Holly Near, and Lean on Me. Today is a profoundly holy and sacred day. End of Facebook post. We prepared to go home the next day. Jennifer, our director of religious education, and the youth made sandwiches from our leftover food and distributed them to the unhoused living close by. We attended Sunday worship, then caught the Max to the train station. On the train ride home, Jeff and I sat at one end of the car, and then we plopped the youth at the other end of the car. We were kind of tired of them. We were all a combination of tired and exhilarated. And despite sharing our train car with a bunch of rowdy, overserved Sounders fans coming home from a game that they lost to the Portland Timbers, I could still hear our loudest youth, Haley and Evie, explaining Unitarian Universalism to these guys. They were delivering their best post-GA elevator speeches and having what sounded like a constructive conversation. What are the odds? It was hilarious. They had a captive audience, and these soccer fans were truly curious to find out more. Every once in a while, a Unitarian Universalist proselytize. I dedicate the lighting of the chalice to all of our experiences at General Assembly and the gifts we bring home from GA. Now, please repeat after me, or please join me in reciting the affirmation in your order of service. As we come together to worship, we remind ourselves to treat all people kindly because they are our brothers and sisters, to take good care of the earth and our home, and to live lives full of love and goodness, because that is how we will all become the best that we can be.
Number 20, Be Thou My Vision, and I invite you to stand because you sing better that way.
So, I made up a new game. We'll see how this goes. I'm going to explain it to you all. You all will get to participate in some way, but I will, once I explain it, ask for 3 volunteers. So, this game, I call it Animal, Profession, or Machine. Animal, Profession, or Machine. And it's a guessing game where those of you out in the congregation are going to have a chance to guess whether or not one of our volunteers are acting out the role of an animal, a profession, or a machine. So that's the first guess. Is it an animal, a professional, or a machine? And just when we get there, you can just call it out. And when I hear it, we'll stop. The second guess that all of you are going to make is to see if you can try to guess what type of animal, professional, or machine that the person is acting out. So let's see, what could I do? Okay. So I want you to just practice really quick and guess whether I'm an animal, a professional, or a machine. Why did you say professional? So that's exactly it. I was being a teller, or I used to work at REI. My title was banker, and I literally just sat there moving money across the desk counting. So that's our first example. And now I'm going to invite 3 folks, if I can get 3 volunteers. And don't be afraid. I promise it's not scary up here. Just raise your hand, or else I'm going to call on you, Elliot. Oh, let's give them a round of applause. Thank you, everyone. Excellent. So, what we're going to do to add another layer to this, I promise it'll make it easier, is once you draw out your categories, we're going to show them to all of us up in this group. And if we get to a point where someone is stuck, someone else is invited to jump in and maybe add a little more detail to what's happening. So let's just pretend, again, I'm the teller, and no one's getting it. What might you do? Okay, we have... See, okay, so we get it. We'll see how this goes. Now, I have our magic baggie here. I'll invite you to draw one. Excellent. And we'll go, I think, in the order you drew. So, Johanna, I'm going to ask you to go first, and the rest of you could just step aside, and if we need help, feel free to jump in.
So we're supposed to show each other, right?
Okay. Okay, so Johanna. Okay, we have an animal. Oh, that was a tiger. Good guess. That was right on. Okay, thank you, Johanna. Yeah, just stay up here in case you're up, Liz. Yeah, you got to... Animal, yeah. Maybe someone can jump in and try to add more detail somehow. Oh, zebra. That is exactly... I'm curious. What gave away zebra?
It looks like she was doing a mane.
Okay. So notice the stripes, very obscure, nice. Elliot? Yeah. This is a challenging one. What did I hear? Yes! Next time Rebecca is coming up to join. It was a conveyor belt. I thought that was going to be the one that stumped everyone. So another round of applause for everyone, yeah. So, one, I think that games like this are fun, and we've talked about how they encourage imagination, but notice how paying attention to subtle details kind of gave away a clue to understanding what was happening. Rebecca is obviously the master of this. She guesses them all. Next time you can act them out with me. But I think that there is something when we come together of pausing and noticing what is going on. Oh, how is that person reacting? What is their body saying in response? Those subtle details that we give away. I know there's a debate over what percentage communication is verbal or nonverbal, and I'm not going to give a number because I don't know. But I think all of us have had times where it's those things that aren't said. It's those things that we witness or experience in the actions or presence of others that let us know what is happening in the situation in the room. So this is my invitation to all of you to, in the week ahead, take time. Notice the subtle details of your interactions and see what they can teach you about what is happening. And that is our time for all ages. I believe that when we come together, there is something that manifests itself in those spaces between us and within us. I'll be honest, I am not always the best at noticing this something. When I'm busy or in a rush, it passes me by. But if I pause and intentionally take a moment to perceive what is around me, there it is. Sometimes I envision this thing that we manifest, this force, as a thread that runs through the heart of each of us, connecting us all, and continues to run through the atoms of all of creation, weaving us into a collective web. Other times I think of it like the glue, a sticky substance stronger than gravity somehow that is keeping us all stuck together in a wonderful and terrifying and mysterious mix of cosmic everything. I invite you now to take a few slow and steady breaths at whatever pace is most comfortable for you. Let the muscles of your body settle and relax. If you're comfortable, maybe let your eyes drift shut. Breathe and relax, and see if in this moment you can notice this force, the thread or glue or however you conceive it that connects us all in the web of life. Open yourself, heart, mind, body, to this connection. Feel how you are being held right now in this moment. Held by the chair beneath you or ground. Held by the air in this room, the light filtering down. Held by this community, and even by the universe itself. Continue breathing and invite your spiritual imagination to come alive. Think about the metaphor for this connection that works for you. Let yourself bloom. A flower rising to meet the face of the sun with its own face. Petals splayed as fingers grasping for the rays of light that are your sustenance. Let yourself breathe. A whisper of wind brushing through blades of grass, stretching out to the horizon further and further and further, until coming back on its circuit, stirs the same field again, connecting beginning to end. Let yourself rest, like a silence between the notes of music, lingering unnoticed, yet supporting the beauty of the song that flows through celestial spheres, stars and planets, slowly and silently caressing the quantum strings, causing them to quake and shiver before giving way to the next beat. When we take the time to notice this deep interconnection that surrounds us, the light, the air, the very nature of existence, and our relationship to the whole, we increase our connection with each other. When we pause and collectively contemplate this bond, we are brought to understanding of ourselves and the rest of creation. At the deepest depths of our being, may we always remember that each of us matters, that we are connected deeply and inextricably, for we are one. May it be so.
Share your sorrows with us so you don't have to bear them alone. Share your joys with us so we can help you celebrate.
1021 in the Teal book, Lean on Me. And if you are, as I am, rhythmically challenged, I invite you to stand and pay really, really careful attention to this. I'm reminded of Gandhi's statement, "There go the people, I must hurry, I am their leader."
Once upon a time, most folks use the offering plate to fulfill their pledges of financial support. Nowadays, lots of folks click on their church websites or set up automatic transfers from their checking accounts. Some still write a monthly check paying their church bill along with all the others. But passing the offering plate was never just a practical exercise. It has always been a ritual. Even if your pledge is paid up, it is worthwhile for you to bring even just $1 to drop into the plate as a ritual reminder of that form of love we call generosity. Let it be a reminder that after meeting our obligations to ourselves and our households and the communities to which we belong and are committed, we must still keep our capacity to give. The practice of giving until it is second nature and first response helps bring forth the realm of love. If you are visiting us for the first time this morning, please feel free to let the basket pass you by. We are simply happy that you're here with us today. Will the ushers please come forward for the offering? Thank you for your generous gifts.
I'm tempted to include Lean on Me in every service going forward because I think there's a metaphor in there for us about how if we stick through it and keep trying and some of us bring in our gifts, we somehow make it work. Thank you, Julie. Thank you all. So, the state of our assembly, our General Assembly. I feel like a president up here delivering a State of the Union. But I want to start by indulging the creative writer in me and set the scene first. So, my red eye from SeaTac landed in Pittsburgh around 7 a.m. Eastern. I got little sleep, but was grateful for the inflatable pillow that I had bought at the airport store after forgetting my own pillow at home. I was hungry because it turns out in this age of where we're at, airlines, even if you order food, are no longer providing food on red-eye flights. When the plane landed, I started to gather my things. The first thought that went through my head was, again, how hungry I was. The second was, why did I check my bag? I began factoring in the additional time that it would take for me to wait at the carousel for my bag to come out, get into my Uber or Lyft or whichever was faster, and away from the airport to find some real food. I stepped off the plane and onto the jet bridge. A line of wheelchairs with attendants with digital signs bearing people's names waited there, greeting me along with the thick, humid air. Despite all of this, despite my lack of sleep, my hunger, my annoyance at the overcrowdedness of the airport, I was excited. I had made it to Pittsburgh. I had made it to General Assembly. I got my bag, made my way out to the pickup area, got in a Lyft, and made my way to the hotel. I knew there would be a restaurant nearby. I got to the hotel and went to the front desk and asked the attendant there, I know that check-in isn't until 4, but could I just stow my bag with you until check-in so I can go get some food and come back? No problem, she said. In fact, I can check you into your room now. It's about 10 a.m. This felt like a miracle. It was like an additional day in a hotel at no cost. Took my stuff to the room, went out, got something to eat nearby, walked over to the convention center and got my credentials, my name badge, and put it on. I was ready for General Assembly. So if you've never been to a General Assembly, this is the annual business meeting of our association, which sounds maybe a little bit boring, and there are times it can be, but it's also really, really exciting. Each year, thousands of Unitarian Universalists from around the world gather in an appointed North American city to worship, learn, and conduct the business of our faith together, to tend to the fires of our living tradition. It's a big deal. It's how we make decisions, how we set priorities, and how we know what's going on in other places. Some years, I'll admit that it is the location that makes the gathering so special. I still feel like I missed out a few years ago when General Assembly was in New Orleans, and I couldn't make it due to a conflict, and everyone is still raving about how great of a time they had. Surprisingly, though, in 2016, I learned that Columbus, Ohio, is actually a pretty cool city. I don't think I would have thought that before. Other times, coming to General Assembly, at least for me, the thing I've come away with is all the amazing relationships and people that I have in my life and get to meet and know and share in this faith together. I think specifically of 2015. That was not the last time General Assembly was in Portland, but the time before. I had just finished my first year of seminary, and myself and 4 of my seminary classmates who were on a budget made the decision to share one single-bed hotel room. That year, I found out that hotel towels don't make the best bedding. This year, it wasn't any of these things. Yes, I got to spend time with amazing people and friends and colleagues and meet new folks. And as I said, Pittsburgh wasn't as, I'll be honest, disappointing as I thought it was going to be. It was actually really cool. However, none of these were the things that stood out to me this year. So, what did? What did I experience? What was happening at General Assembly that felt noteworthy this year? So I want to start with something that actually happens just before the official start of the General Assembly gathering. Before General Assembly, the Ministers Association has a gathering called Ministry Days, which culminates at the end with the delivery of an essay address. This address is called the Berry Street Essay or the Berry Street Address. It started in 1920 when the Reverend William Ellery Channing invited colleagues from, at the time, what they were calling the liberal church. Channing was one of the individuals who eventually really coined and started using the term Unitarian. So prior, we were the liberal church. Channing invited ministers from the liberal church around the Boston area to meet in the vestry of his congregation. The door of the vestry opened out onto Berry Street, the namesake of what has become the namesake of this essay series. According to many historians, this essay, this address, is considered to be the longest running lecture series in North America. This year was the 122nd delivery of the Berry Street Address and has continued every year from 1820 until today, with the exception of 1 year during the first year of when the United States entered World War II. This year, the colleague who was asked to give the address is someone that many of you may know if you've been around the Pacific Northwest for a while. It was the Reverend Cecilia Kingman. Cecilia and her family live over in West Seattle, and until very recently, she was one of the co-ministers at the Edmonds Unitarian congregation. Cecilia is a powerful preacher and a fierce advocate for social justice, and her essay highlighted both of these gifts. I think she brought us a really important message for where we're at. In her address to those gathered, she explored the rise in authoritarianism that we have been experiencing in our country, around the world, and at times even in our own communities, our own faith communities, or our faith as a whole. She invited us into this exploration, noting some of the features of what some social psychologists call the features of fascism that some social psychologists have named. She brought in our faith to this conversation, saying, Unitarian Universalism is currently in a moment of major theological and institutional reform. This transition is causing a backlash within our congregations and among some colleagues. We are moving away from individualism to communitarian values, from white supremacy culture to truly racially liberating forces, from a concentration of power among historically privileged groups and towards a new form of power sharing. Some are responding to these shifts with anxiety and conflict. Some who are being asked to give up the primacy of their privilege and power are responding with tactics drawn from fascist politics. I know often we have talked about these trends within our larger culture, our larger context. But these things have seeped even into our faith. We are not immune. We are part of the larger context. And to be aware of, to notice these things, and to bring that awareness into the spaces we occupy is important. I felt that opening sort of General Assembly, even though it was not the official start with this message, was important, for it helped set stage work for conversations that would unfold later in some of the general sessions. We'll come to that in a bit. In closing my reflection, though, on the Berry Street essay, Reverend Cecilia reminds us, or calls us, in the face of these rising forces of authoritarianism, to be tenacious in our spiritual practices and community care. Let us remember all those who came before us and survived far, far worse than anything we can imagine, and that we are held in the hands of a love that abides. I think that's true at the end of it, that we are held in the hands of a love that abides, even in the face of hate and disagreement. When we pause and remember our connection, we're reminded of that. There were many other things throughout the General Assembly, though, that felt a little more tense. And I kept coming back to this idea of love throughout, even in those moments when I felt my own disagreement as a delegate or disagreement with colleagues rising in some of the conversations, coming back to this love that abides. So, let's get into some of the business. This is a big year for our assembly. We, for the first time, have filled, for the first time in, I think the math was done in about 17 years, all of the elected positions within our association were filled. As someone who was on the nominating committee and just elected to a second term, I can tell you that this was big work. So, who was elected? Some of you may have come to know the Reverend Dr. Susan Frederick Gray over the last several years. She has been the president of our association and someone I hold in high esteem, and felt that she really ministered to us in many ways throughout the pandemic. I know in those first years, our virtual services oftentimes made use of many of her messages, reminding us to come together in the spirit of love. And while I am really grateful for the ministry that Susan brought to our association, this year our General Assembly elected the Reverend Dr. Sophia Bettencourt as the next president of our association. A Religion News article covering the election opens by proclaiming, "Unitarian Universalists elect first woman of color, openly queer president." The article goes on, adding the following details. A womanist theologian, ethicist, and minister was installed as the 10th president of the Unitarian Universalist Association Sunday afternoon, June 25th, following an uncontested election in which she secured 95.5% of the vote. She is both the first openly queer person and first woman of color to lead the faith tradition and will serve a 6-year term. So to be honest, I know Sophia very well personally. She was one of my professors when I was in seminary, and I have remained in contact with her since starting here at Cedars and have been fortunate to have many conversations with her. There's one thing, and I trust her leadership, and I think she will do a wonderful job leading us. One of the things that got brought up at the assembly regarding her election that I want to name here is the fact that this was an uncontested election. Now, in an ideal world, I do believe every election should have multiple, maybe not even two, but multiple candidates with multiple positions for us to discern between. And as I mentioned earlier, this being the first time in many years, all of the elected positions were filled. We are lucky we even had a presidential candidate this cycle. As you can imagine, the strains of the last few years, all that we have navigated through the pandemic, have made the job for many seem less than desirable. Not to mention, the work of identifying someone to run for this position was set back actually by almost 2 years from the process that they're supposed to follow. I'll give you a little bit of insider information on this particular piece. I mentioned I just finished my first term on the nominating committee. When I started in 2020, it was right after all of the nominating committee, except for one member, had resigned in protest. That year leading up to General Assembly in 2020, the nominating committee put forth their slate of candidates for the various positions. And the Board of Trustees came back and said that many of the candidates weren't of the caliber or the standard or identities that they wanted. Now, the thing about our polity and how we govern ourselves is that the nominating committee is considered to be a committee of the General Assembly, not the board. And so their authority is given through the General Assembly. And when this line was crossed and everyone resigned, it meant that that year in which the Presidential Search Committee was supposed to be formed, it didn't. The Presidential Search Committee, of course, is responsible for identifying these candidates and bringing them forth to the Assembly, and it didn't. When we finally were able to form the Presidential Search Committee, it was 2 years behind where they should have been. And when they started their work, everyone who was approached said no. So if you're interested in running next cycle, I could help you there. So it was an uncontested election, but I think there are many circumstances, and I hope that we will be able to trust in Sophia's leadership in the way we did in Susan Frederick Gray's leadership over the last 6 years, and I'm excited. Some other notable things was each year our General Assembly, we take we consider what are called actions of immediate witness. These are stances that we as an association take on matters, and many people feel that they're not important because they don't have a binding authority to them. They're stances the association, the delegates take as a whole, but congregations, whether or not they act on them or incorporate them, it's always ultimately up to them. These, though, are very important in that they set the historical record of where we are as an association. Many times in my preaching of sermons, I have referred to these when we've talked about our advocacy for abortion rights, when we've talked about our advocacy around LGBTQ issues. These statements are what sort of capture the historical timeline of where we are, even if they're not necessarily binding. I think they represent the zeitgeist. So this year, there were 3. They all passed. Stop Cop City was one that was focused on stopping the militarization and building of a very large police compound of sorts in Atlanta, Georgia. And that was one. I'm just going to list them. We advocate for and affirmed healthcare equity, the right for people to make decisions about their body, whether that is a reproductive decision, seeking, abortion care, or whether it's a decision about how I want to live or end my life when appropriate. These were things that we affirmed, as well as our desire to continue to support the dreamers, to protect those immigrant children who come to this country, making sure that they have opportunities to be here and to participate in all that we have to offer. Quickly, and this one was the surprisingly controversial one. We had a business resolution that was asking the General Assembly to divest from fossil fuels, to divest all of our investment accounts in the UUA's funds and the General Endowment Fund from fossil fuels. And this did not pass. It was a very tense conversation. In the end, the vote was 68.3% voted for it not to pass, 31.7% voted for it, and 2% abstained. I think that this particular issue really highlighted an important tension for us all to wrestle with. This issue was brought forward to the Assembly by a group of youth activists who were advocating for this divestment and had very, very impassioned and very, very deeply rooted in our values explanations of why. And generationally, though, the differences, the understanding between financial institutions and activism, we weren't on the same page. At the General Assembly, some of you may have heard, one of the UUA staff folks was let go from their position for being seen as advocating for a particular stance, which is something in a staff role you shouldn't do. And it led to a lot of tension in the room. And I think that tension between the generations is something that we will continue to have to wrestle with. The good news, though, in terms of environmental activism, this conversation is not over. We have a chance to come up with other business resolutions, to propose them, and to think about how we can bridge that gap in between our generations and protect our environment, and also protect our investments, because I think as an institution, that's part of it. The final thing that I will touch on is the Article 2 discussion. I know that this is something we talked about as a congregation for the last several months here at Cedars, and we voted to instruct our delegates to take a stance to oppose it. And I know, and I've spoken with Jeff, and I'm assuming Herb too, that we represented that view of the congregation. And sometimes democracy doesn't always give us what we want. And Article 2, the proposal did pass. It was an 86.3% yes and a 13.7% no, with a 0.2% abstaining. So I know many folks deeply love our principles and sources. The good news is this doesn't mean we're getting rid of them. It doesn't mean we have to stop using them to inform our life. In fact, it doesn't even mean that a final decision has been made. Where we're at now in the process is that over the last several months leading up to this discussion, leading up to this General Assembly, a number of amendments were proposed. The wording of all those amendments is still being worked out, but we are going to take, as an association, another year together to continue to look at this issue, to continue studying it, to continue articulating what it means to be a Unitarian Universalist. We will know in about 6 months' time how those amendments is incorporated into the text of what is being proposed. But in the time being, this is a chance for us to continue that theological discourse, to continue holding the complexity. And as I said, that we'll know next year what comes of all this. And it could come to a vote next year and fail. We don't know at this point. But as I said earlier when we had a community conversation, this is a chance to really explore what it means to be a Unitarian Universalist. And if you haven't had a chance to go and listen to some of the conversations that unfolded during the general session, I'd encourage you to take a look. The recordings are now available online, but to listen to what people around the country, what people around our association are saying and articulating around this issue. We don't know exactly where it's going to end up, but I think the important part is continuing to question, continuing to search. So, after many days of business meetings, after many days of early morning choir rehearsals and worship services, I boarded my plane. I was one of the few people leaving Pittsburgh who, for some reason, managed to make it out on my flight. Many others were canceled, delayed, and I have one colleague, I think he took him 72 additional hours to get home. I was grateful to be back here. It was wonderful to be among so many other people sharing in our values and faith. And at the end of it all, I really just wanted to be back here with you, continuing the work that we started together and hopefully we'll keep doing together. I don't have a particularly eloquent way to close this out, and I recognize that it's probably a little bit not the best sermon ever. And because of how we govern ourselves, how we make decisions, how we do all the things as Unitarian Universalists, I did feel it important to take this time to share some of the business with you. I'm happy to answer any questions if you have. I know that Jeff, also who attended online, we've had some robust conversations, and I'd love to just talk more to the glory of life.
Our closing hymn, number 311 in the Gray Book. This is our hymn of the month for July, so you'll get a chance to practice it some more. We'll be singing it every Sunday in July. Please rise.
Please rise as you're willing and able, and join me in reciting as I extinguish the challenge. Please repeat after me. Sorry about that. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth.
We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth.
The warmth of community or the fire of commitment.
The warmth of community or the fire of commitment.
These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Our service is ended, but our service to the world and one another begins anew. May we go forth knowing that we are held by a deep and abiding love, that we are connected to one another in meaningful ways, and that we are tending in this very moment to the flames of our living faith. May it be so.